So this is my week 15 reflection, and my partners were Nick and Deacon. So I'll be talking about Nick's first. Um, his was going over the chemical application um, of pesticides over farmland using drones, which I think really fits his um, his major, as he's in ag business. And on the business side, it saves on a lot of efficiencies of agriculture, just in the form of fuel and costs of labor and the amount of pesticides that they have to use. Um, and it's just directly related to agriculture, so it really fits. And so he chose to talk about Canada and India for his developed country and his developing country. Um, a lot of his points point out how it's a lot more cost effective and it really increases safety. So in his paper, he talked about in his personal account how his dad was actually in an accident doing this sort of work, and it really left him like severely injured, and he had to stop working in the field because of this. And so the drones would be manned autonomously using programs, and so it would really save a lot of workers' lives that would otherwise um, have to use these planes. That it depends on how good they are as a pilot, the state of the plane, and just how good the weather is for whatever time that they're doing. And so it really improves their safety by a lot and really can save a bunch of lives. Um, and it's really effective because it works with new technology. It can be easily programmed, and as drones are being developed and improved, the drones are gonna just become even more effective as time goes on, because they're gonna be able to carry more. Their battery life is gonna be improved, and they'll just be able to accomplish the job a lot more efficiently as time goes on. And then uh, this this ability to program the planes actually improves the coverage up to 95 to 98% of a field, as compared to before, which would be 85 to 90%. And so there's an overall like 10 to 13% increase that would really improve the farmers um, time, because uh, instead of having to spend hours getting the plane ready, taking having to maintain the plane, and load up all this stuff, which might take days or weeks to accomplish, and then actually going out and flying the plane. The drones can just work autonomously, and so they would be able to do it like at like a very very reduced cost. And this effectiveness ends up saving them around 20 to 35% of pesticides, which just increase the cost on pesticides, as these chemicals can be expensive. And yeah, they'll be able to save a lot more of the crops, um, ending up a lot more profitable. And then on the side of a developing country, it's too risky for developing countries to actually try and roll this out. In India, these countries have a lot more farmers that are more rurally owned, that their livelihood is their farm. It's not like they're outsourcing their food to some sort of bigger company, or they have the means like other bigger farms in Canada, who are a lot more established and have the funds to actually outsource this kind of thing. And you know this would take away from a lot of people's jobs. They have to do a lot more stuff manually because they don't have the type of technology that they have. And so this would just take a lot of the workers jobs away. And you know um, a lot of these people aren't even educated or informed on this kind of thing. They don't know all the emerging technology, and so they don't even know about the benefits of this stuff yet, because they haven't heard of it. They can't set aside money to like actually try and fund or own this kind of thing. And it's just too big of a of an investment for them to put in. This is more of a thing that pays itself off, like as it's more effective. And um, these people in India, they might not have the farmland that would actually give them an immediate like increase in profits, or would just take way too long for them to see the benefits of this. And so yeah, and on the appropriateness for Canada, I think it's really appropriate because financially and technology and technically they have the infrastructure able to do this, and a lot of bigger farms might be able to actually outsource this kind of thing with the profits that they're able to come up with. But culturally in Canada, they have a lot stricter laws that pertain to pesticides, and so it's actually illegal in most places for them to use this. And so I think that it really is not a good fit. Maybe if they want to choose it for irrigation systems, it might help, but that's the only way I see it being culturally acceptable. But in terms of India, I just really don't think it's really a good fit for them financially or technically or culturally. You know, um, these people just straight up don't have the funds to be able to fund something like this. It's a lot riskier for them. They're gonna have to set up infrastructures like control grids and power grids that would be able to reach the the countries or the countryside farms, and that would just take a lot of time and money for them to actually start investing in this right now. And culturally, like I said, a lot of these people, this is their livelihood, and they just don't have the ability to get something like this, and end up taking away jobs from people that might otherwise be profiting from the manual labor that this invention would take away. And the the overall environmental impact of this, I think it's like really good. um Airplanes, they would have to take a lot more energy. They take a lot more materials to create, and compared to a drone, which is rechargeable because it uses a lithium battery. um it just saves a lot on fuel, which would otherwise go into the atmosphere and like really affect our ozone. And um the fact that it can save 20 to 35% of pesticides means that that's like 20 to 35% less pesticides going into the air and polluting the air and polluting like other healthy wildlife around the farms. And yeah, um, overall, I think his paper was pretty good. Um, there were just some points to where I was like, um, kind of not like the standard like professional paper type language, but that's probably just nitpicking on my part. Um, um, I thought his introduction was pretty good. He got straight to the point. He pointed out his own his major, which helped it better be understood why he's talking about this. And then his body, he described his the invention pretty well. He went over a lot of the the necessary things that go into the development and what a drone is, and he talked about how it would just improve a lot of stuff, um, just with the features that it has. And I think he debated his points really well. um, I think his citations were good, and they worked with his material. And he obviously had um, the right amount of citations. I think he had 5 or 6 of them, so that was good on him. And his conclusion, he made some good points. How it's a really good invention that can obviously help a lot of people in the agriculture business. But he also added some nuance how this would be able to improve effectiveness in doing this kind of stuff, and how it would help the environment, but how it might not be effective for all countries, just because of laws and just what it what it means for them financially and culturally for them and stuff. So I think he had a pretty good paper overall. And then um, Deacon's Deacon's paper was over 3D printed housing. Um, he's a construction management major, and so I think this works well with his major, as you know, this is a part of construction that would be able to save a lot of time and energy on constructing buildings. He compared Germany and Mexico as his two countries that he was comparing, and so for developed countries, the main points were that it was quicker, as you know. Otherwise, it would take construction crews uh, months or even years to construct buildings or homes for people, while a 3D printer you can put in the the program, and it would be able to run autonomously around the clock. And so compared to like a whole construction crew, it would just take around a day to create a large enough house that's satisfactory for the person wanting it. And it's safer because obviously it takes out the human element of humans having to go out there and maybe risk their lives doing this sort of work. There's obvious risks in construction, like there's a lot of safety hazards when coming into this. And you know um, it could be safer because the programs would be able to use a lot more regulatory code in them, and so they wouldn't be able to skimp on little sections to improve effectiveness. They would just make a good house for a quicker amount of time. But he also did talk about how in the beginning the capital for starting these types of machines is really expensive, but over the time they will pay themselves off because they greatly decrease labor costs. It takes away the entire aspect of having to pay people around the clock per hour, per job, per material, as compared to just putting in a 3D printer and pressing play and just letting it do its thing. And um, but that also does set some restrict boundaries for places like Mexico. A lot of the people in Mexico, their jobs is construction, so that would be taking a lot of people's livelihoods out of away from them. It might cause them to have to look for other employments, as this would be taking away their jobs. You know, um, and like I said, it is really expensive for starting this, and so it might not be as viable for companies in Mexico to outright set their eyes on developing this sort of technology. But and yeah, for Germany, I think it's a good choice because they already have a strong already have a strong enough economy to support this sort of thing. They have cutting edge engineers um, that would be able to be trained in this sort of thing. Oh yeah, and that's another downside, is that the training and sort of stuff, it isn't outright as available to people in Mexico as it would be in in Germany. And so Germany has a lot more engineers that are able to learn and progress this sort of technology, and so they'd be able to benefit from it a lot more. I think financially and technically, they could serve a lot of people from this. He talks about how this might improve like people, especially in Mexico, who don't have the infrastructure due to cartel or poverty. Like, this could improve their lives a great deal. And so I think for Canada, this is a good thing. if they want to decrease like homeless or just improve the availability and house market for people. And culturally, I think it fits right in. It's never a bad thing to have something efficient and works well, but culturally, a lot of people might have some reluctance to use this, and so you can see that as a downside. They have to develop this sort of technology to actually be able to spread it out uh, in the country and surrounding countries. And for Mexico, I thought it was really interesting how they actually had the first community of 3D homes, and so it that might lead you to believe that this is like a really um, good choice for them to choose. But financially, they're restricted by a lot of political things, and the wealth isn't dispersed as well in other countries such as Germany. There's a lot of restricting factors like the cartel and obviously the poverty situation of a specific region. Um, and they have a much more restricted economy, um, and it's restricted a lot more by their workers and technology, and so just financially, it would take them a long time to build up to this, and technologically, they'd have to spend a lot of money on like informing their workers, improving this sort of technology, and just investing in the tech, and then um I think culturally, I think it would be effective. It might affect some people's livelihoods, but at the end of the day, there is a lot of homelessness and poverty in Mexico. Well, but this would be able to fit right in. It'd be a lot once these people do get these sort of machines, they'll have no problem with building a 3D home, and they're already on the forefront of this, seeing as they already had the first um, community, and so they might be a lot less reluctant to use this. They might be like, oh, um, over here had a community of these already, and they don't seem to have no problems, and so you know why shouldn't we give it a go? And so I think it's a good thing. Um, on the impact of the the environment, you know, it's kind of hard to say. It really depends on the effectiveness of their of the concrete that they're using. And he talks about how they use mortar called concrete ink. You know, he didn't really talk about how like this was made or manufactured. So that might come into play of just how they have to harvest this, but um it would be able to take away a lot of the tool costs and stuff. So they use a lot of diesel powered and hydraulic powered machinery, high powered machinery that has to go over and storm the land, like flatten the land, and it obviously has to take up a lot of fuel to power these sort of things. And so it would be able to take away some impact on that side. And yeah, that's a good thing, but it's kind of up in the air to see how much this would affect the environment. I think it could, but you know um at the end of the day, it would be dependent on the materials and like really how effective it is. Like if it can put stuff up like in a couple hours or days, and yeah, then it's gonna be really effective. But if it really takes a little bit longer than like a week or so, it could it could otherwise like still end up reaching the same amount of pollutants, just because it has to run around the clock and will obviously take up a lot of um fuel needs. um I thought his introduction was good. It was pretty short, but it was short and to the point. It He brought up the problems that he was going to discuss in his paper, and it was just a nice and sweet short little introduction. And um yeah, when he was describing the technology, he went over it somewhat well. I feel like he could have talked more about the actual, like how the actual like technology works, talking about the machines, but he more so talked about like how it's a new developing sort of thing, and he talked about how it changes the the way we view um construction, because it takes over the safety side, and uh it's just a new emerging thing that is pretty cool. And I thought his paper was pretty interesting, and he did have the correct amount of citations. I think he could have used a little bit more quoting in his work, but otherwise he had his required four citations. And I thought his conclusion was pretty nice. Um, he talks about, like, he just goes over the general paper, how it would be able to um, like be much faster and lower in costs, and there would be a lot of benefits in reducing problems like machine costs. And he talked about how there's obviously a few machine costs, um, a few problems because of the machine costs, and how it would take away people's jobs. And the how um, these are obviously a new technology, and so they have to be looked over and regulated a little bit differently. But he talks about how in the future it could be effective. So yeah, I thought it was a pretty neat paper. Um, it could have been a little bit longer, and he could have went over a couple more points. I would have liked to see a little bit more like explanation on really how it works, but you know I don't really think it differs from regular 3D printing, so I guess there's a point to be made where he didn't really have to go over it completely. But I thought it was a pretty interesting paper, and he made a good insight on the differences between Germany and Mexico. And so yeah, I think these two did a pretty good job on their paper. Don't really have much complaints, but yeah, that was my week 15 reflection.